Hey everyone, ready to kind of shake things up in the business world a little bit?
Always up for that.
Awesome. Well, today we're going to dive deep into this idea of transient competitive advantage.
It's a fascinating concept.
Totally. And it really challenges that old school idea of building a sustainable competitive advantage, right?
Yeah,
Like finding that one magic formula and just riding that wave forever.
exactly. For decades, that was the holy grail of business strategy, building a moat around your business, protecting it from competitors. Keep those profits rolling in.
Yeah, yeah. Like create a fortress that's going to last for years, maybe even decades.
Yeah.
Right. But something tells me that model's not really working so well these days.
Yeah, you're right. It's kind of crumbling before our eyes, to be honest.
What's changed? Why is that?
Well, the business world has been totally reshaped. I mean, think about it. Globalization, tech disruption happening at warp speed, and oh, let's not forget those fickle consumers always wanting the next best thing.
It's like the ground is constantly shifting beneath our feet.
Exactly. And all those once impenetrable moats, they're practically disappearing. Advantages just don't last as long as they used to. They pop up, they peak, and then poof, they fade away. Faster than ever before.
Okay, so that classic idea of a sustainable competitive advantage, it's out the window.
Mhm.
So what now? What are businesses supposed to do? How can they not just survive, but actually thrive in this crazy environment of constant change and fleeting advantages?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And the answer is agility. Businesses need to become incredibly nimble, adaptable.
I like where you're going with this. Give me more.
Think of a surfer, constantly scanning the horizon, riding the waves. Businesses need to be like those surfers. Catch a wave, ride it, then jump off before it crashes and find the next one.
Okay, love the analogy. But let's get practical here. How can companies actually become more agile? Because let's be honest, most companies are built more like, I don't know, giant cruise ships than nimble surfboards.
That's a good point. It's a huge shift. The first step is to really rethink that old traditional corporate structure.
You mean those slow hierarchical models?
Yeah, exactly. All those layers of bureaucracy, endless decision-making chains. They just can't keep up in this fast-paced world.
So instead of having like a CEO making every single call, you're suggesting a more decentralized approach.
Exactly. Think about companies like Amazon. They've become incredibly agile by empowering smaller, self-contained teams.
Okay, interesting.
Those teams, they're given the freedom to make decisions, experiment, pivot quickly, no waiting for layers of approval.
So it's almost like creating a bunch of mini startups within a bigger organization.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. These smaller, more nimble teams, they can move fast, respond to market changes, and take risks without paralyzing the entire organization.
I'm starting to get the picture. But agility, it's not just about structure, right? It's got to be about culture too, doesn't it?
You're absolutely right. It's a huge part of it. You need to build a culture that embraces experimentation, where failure isn't a disaster, but a learning experience.
Okay, hold on a second. So you're saying companies should actually encourage their people to take risks, even if it means they might fail. Isn't that a bit, I don't know, dangerous?
There's a balance, for sure. It's not about reckless abandon, it's about creating a safe space for people to try new things, even if they don't always work out. The key is to learn from those failures, adapt, and get better.
Right, it's about seeing failure as a stepping stone to success, not the end of the world. But how do you actually create that kind of cultural shift within a company? That's a big task.
Well, leadership plays a huge role. Senior leaders, they need to walk the walk, show that it's okay to experiment, that failure is part of the process. And of course, you need systems and processes that encourage and reward that kind of behavior.
So things like celebrating successful experiments, sharing the lessons learned from those failures, and maybe even rewarding employees for taking initiative and trying new things.
You got it. And remember, this culture of experimentation, it shouldn't just be limited to, product development or marketing. It needs to be everywhere. Operations, finance, HR, customer service, everywhere.
So it's about creating a company where everyone from the CEO to the newest hire feels empowered to innovate and challenge the status quo.
Precisely. Now, speaking of innovation, let's talk about how to actually build a robust innovation pipeline. Because in this world of transient competitive advantage, one big breakthrough isn't enough.
Right. You can't just rest on your laurels, can you? So you're saying it's not about hitting that one home run every now and then, but about consistently getting those base hits.
Exactly. Companies need a constant stream of innovations, big and small. Think of it like a portfolio of innovations. Some are incremental improvements, some are those disruptive, game-changing ideas, and some are focused on streamlining operations, making things more efficient, working on all fronts.
So you're always working on multiple things, making sure there's always something new coming down the pipeline. It sounds like a lot to manage, but I can see how this approach would give companies a real advantage in a market that's constantly changing.
It definitely takes effort, but the payoff is huge. Now, to effectively manage this constant flow of innovations, we need a framework, a strategy. That's where waste management comes in.
Okay, wave management. Sounds interesting. Tell me more about that.
Picture that surfer again. They see a wave forming, paddle like crazy to catch it, ride it, and then dismount gracefully before it crashes. Wave management is all about applying that same mindset to business strategy.
So instead of clinging to one advantage for dear life, you're strategically hopping from one wave of opportunity to the next. I like that visual.
It's a powerful way to think about it, and there's a definite cycle to this wave management approach.
Okay, break it down for me. What's step one?
Spotting those waves of opportunity. It's all about identifying those emerging trends, new technologies, or shifts in customer behavior that could give you a temporary edge.
So you're talking about being really in tune with what's happening in the world, looking for those signals that something big is about to change.
Absolutely. The companies that are really good at this, they're plugged into what's happening in culture, tech, and the global marketplace. They're constantly scanning the horizon for those subtle hints that a new wave is about to form.
Okay, let's say you've spotted a promising wave. What's next?
Move fast. Once you've identified an opportunity, you need to seize it quickly. Maybe launch a new product, enter a new market, or even make a big pivot in your business model.
So speed is everything. But isn't there a risk of moving too quickly? What if you make a mistake?
Of course there's risk, but in this environment, perfect information is a luxury you rarely have. Windows of opportunity close fast.
So it's better to make a decision and adjust later than to miss the boat entirely.
You got it. And this is where that agile structure and culture we talked about becomes so critical. Being able to make those quick decisions and pivot quickly, that's essential.
Okay, so you've spotted the wave, you've caught it, you're riding high. What's the next stage?
Scale, scale, scale. Maximize your impact. Once you've established yourself in a new market or launched a successful product, you need to scale up rapidly to capture as much market share as possible.
So it's about really putting the pedal to the metal and riding that wave of success for all it's worth.
Absolutely. This phase is about aggressive growth and expansion, maybe investing heavily in marketing and sales, expanding operations, or even acquiring companies to accelerate your growth. It's go time.
But we both know those waves don't last forever. At some point, they crest and start to break. So what then? What's the final piece of this wave management cycle?
That's the most crucial part and often the most difficult, knowing when and how to disengage.
Disengage, meaning letting go of that successful product or market before it starts to decline.
Exactly. And that's where things get really interesting. It's a whole new way of thinking about success.
All right, I'm all ears. Tell me more about this disengagement phase. How do you know when it's time to move on? How do you make that call?
Well, there are a few key indicators to look for, things that can tell you it's time to start thinking about your next move.
Like what? Give me some examples.
Well, one obvious sign is slowing growth. If your sales start to flatten out, market share starts to shrink, it might be a sign that that wave is about to break.
Makes sense. So you're not just looking at your current success, you're also trying to anticipate what's coming next and being ready to adapt, right?
Precisely. Another thing to watch for is new competition entering the market. If you see new players coming in with innovative products or services that are starting to grab market share, that's a sign the landscape is shifting, your advantage might be fading.
So you're constantly scanning the market, looking for any sign that your competitive edge might be eroding. But even if you spot those signs early, letting go of something that's been successful, that can't be easy, especially if it's been a big win for your company.
You're right. It takes real courage to walk away from something that's been a winner. But remember, in this world of transient competitive advantage, holding on too long can actually be fatal to your long-term success.
It's almost like you need to have the discipline to sell a stock when it's at its peak, even though you might be tempted to hold on and see if it goes even higher.
Exactly. It's about making smart decisions for the long-term health of your business, even if those decisions are tough in the short term.
Okay, so you've made the tough decision to disengage. What's next? What do you do with all the resources you've freed up?
That's the beauty of this approach. You take those resources, the talent, the capital, the knowledge, and you redeploy them to catch that next wave of opportunity.
So it's a continuous cycle of spotting, catching, riding, and disengaging from those waves of competitive advantage.
You got it. And to manage this cycle effectively, you need to rethink those traditional resource allocation models. The way companies allocate resources has to become as agile as the companies themselves.
Okay, let's dive into that. How should companies approach resource allocation in this new world of transient advantage?
The old ways just don't cut it anymore. Those rigid annual budgeting cycles, the focus on rewarding past successes, it makes it incredibly hard to shift gears and invest in new opportunities.
So companies get stuck pouring money into the same old projects, even when they're not the best use of resources anymore, just because they've always done it that way.
Exactly. In a world of transient advantage, resources need to be as fluid and adaptable as the market itself. They need to flow to where they can create the most value, not just get stuck in the past.
So how do you create that kind of dynamic resource allocation process?
Well, it's a big shift. You need to move away from those rigid annual budgets and think more about rolling forecasts, constantly reevaluating priorities, adjusting spending based on what's happening in the market.
So instead of locking in a budget for a whole year, you're constantly tweaking and adjusting based on the latest information.
Exactly. It allows you to be a lot more nimble, a lot more responsive to those market shifts. And, another important piece is transparency. You've got to create a culture where everyone understands how resources are being allocated and why.
So no more secret backroom deals or pet projects getting funded just because they're someone's favorite.
Right. Transparency builds trust and makes sure those resources are being used wisely. And hey, don't be afraid to try new models for resource allocation. Some companies are experimenting with internal marketplaces where different teams can bid on resources based on their strategic priorities. Others are using data-driven algorithms to optimize resource allocation. It's a really exciting time for innovation in this area.
It sounds like companies are getting creative to find ways to be more agile and responsive with their resources.
They have to be. In this new world of transient competitive advantage, speed and adaptability are everything.
Okay, we've covered a lot of ground here. We've talked about agility, innovation, wave management, and even resource allocation. But there's another piece of the puzzle that we haven't touched on yet. Talent. How do you find and retain the right people to navigate this rapidly changing world?
That's a great question, and one that we'll dive into in more detail in the next part of our deep dive. Because the reality is, the skills that were in demand just a few years ago might be completely irrelevant today. And the skills we need tomorrow, well, we might not even know what they are yet.
It's almost like trying to hit a moving target. So how do you build a workforce that's ready for anything? How do you find those adaptable, lifelong learners who can thrive in this kind of environment?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And one that we'll tackle head-on in our next session.
I can't wait. This is all so fascinating. It's clear that we're in the middle of a massive shift in the way we think about business. The old rules are out the window, and companies that want to succeed need to embrace this new reality. They need to become agile, innovative, and customer-centric, and they need to find and nurture the right talent to lead the way.
You're absolutely right. It's a whole new ballgame. And the companies that figure this out, the ones that can adapt and thrive in this world of transient competitive advantage, they'll be the ones that define the future.
Okay, so much to think about, so much to unpack. Looking forward to our next conversation.
Me too. It's going to be great.
Welcome back. It's amazing how much ground we covered in the first part of our deep dive into transient competitive advantage.
I know, right? We talked about agility, innovation, wave management. Those are some pretty big concepts.
They are. But there's so much more to unpack. Where do we go from here? What else do we need to explore to really understand how businesses can make it in this constantly changing world?
Let's talk about something that might seem a little counterintuitive. Exit strategies.
Exit strategies. Wait a minute. Shouldn't we be focusing on how to stay in the game, not how to get out?
I know, it seems strange, right? But in a world of transient competitive advantage, knowing when and how to exit a market, well, it's just as important as knowing when to enter.
Okay, help me wrap my head around this. Why is having a solid exit strategy so crucial in this new landscape?
Think of it like pruning a tree. You cut away those dead branches to help the healthy ones flourish. Same idea in business. If you're holding on to something for too long, it could be a product, a market, even a whole business model, you're missing out on new opportunities and ultimately you're holding yourself back.
Okay, I'm starting to see your point. So it's kind of about recognizing that nothing lasts forever, and sometimes the smartest move is knowing when to step back gracefully.
Right. Exactly. You have to constantly evaluate your position, be honest about when an advantage is fading, and be ready to make tough decisions when you need to.
It's like ripping off a Band-Aid. It might sting a bit at first, but it's better in the long run. But how do you know when it's time to make that tough call? What signs should companies be looking for?
One of the most obvious signs is slowing growth. If your sales figures are flattening out, market share shrinking, that wave you were riding, it's probably about to break.
So you're not just celebrating your current wins, you're also looking ahead, trying to anticipate what's coming next,
Right.
always staying one step ahead.
Right. And keep an eye out for new competition entering market. If you see new players coming in with innovative products or services and they're starting to gain traction, that's a sign the landscape is changing and your advantage might be fading.
So you're constantly scanning the horizon, looking for any sign that your position might be weakening, like a hawk. But even when you spot those signs early, making that decision to exit, to walk away from something that's been successful, it's got to be tough, right? Especially if it's something that's been a big win for your company.
You're absolutely right. It takes courage and discipline to walk away from a winner. It can be really tempting to just hold on, hope things turn around. But in a world of transient competitive advantage, holding on too long, well, it can be fatal.
It's like that old saying, quit while you're ahead. But it's easier said than done, right?
It is. But having a well-defined exit strategy can really help. It takes some of the emotion out of the decision-making process.
So how do you create one of these exit strategies? What are the key elements?
It all starts with setting clear exit criteria up front before you even enter a market.
So defining what success looks like, but also defining what failure looks like.
Exactly. What are the metrics that you'll be watching? What market conditions would signal it's time to pull the plug? By defining these criteria in advance, you're basically creating a roadmap for yourself, a way to make those tough decisions based on data, not on emotion.
So you're not making decisions based on fear or wishful thinking. You're being strategic. I like that.
Exactly. And once you've established those criteria, you need to monitor them closely. Regularly review your performance, see how you're stacking up against those metrics. Stay informed about what's happening in the market.
Always be on the lookout.
Yes, and remember, a successful exit strategy isn't just about knowing when to leave, it's also about knowing how to leave.
Okay, so how do you do that? How do you make sure you're exiting gracefully?
Have a plan for what you'll do with all those resources that you're freeing up. The talent, the capital, the equipment, even the knowledge you've gained. Think about how you can redeploy those assets effectively.
Right, so you're not just walking away empty-handed. You're taking all of that valuable stuff and putting it to work somewhere else.
Exactly. Think of it like a well-choreographed dance. As you're
Yeah.
exiting one area, you're already smoothly transitioning into the next opportunity.
It's a beautiful image.
Yeah.
But let's not forget the human side of this. Exiting a business often means people lose their jobs. How do you manage that part of the process in a way that's ethical and, compassionate?
That's a crucial point. You have to be transparent. You have to be empathetic. Communicate openly with your employees throughout the entire process. Explain why you're making this decision and offer support to those who are transitioning out.
It's about treating people with respect, even when you're making tough business decisions.
Absolutely. And remember, a well-managed exit can actually create opportunities for both the company and its employees.
How so?
Well, for the company, it frees up resources to pursue new ventures, new growth areas. And for employees, it can be a chance to explore new career paths, maybe learn new skills, maybe even find something they're more passionate about.
So it's not always about endings. It's often about new beginnings.
Exactly. Now, let's shift gears a bit and talk about something that's essential in this era of transient competitive advantage, a deep understanding of your customers.
I love that topic. It's so easy to get caught up in all this talk about strategy and forget that at the end of the day, it's all about the people you're serving.
You're absolutely right. And in today's market, customer centricity is more important than ever. It's not enough to just build a great product and expect people to come running. You need to really understand your customers. What do they need? What do they want? What are their pain points?
Because those needs and wants are constantly changing, aren't they?
Absolutely. Consumer behavior is evolving faster than ever before, and the days of relying solely on brand loyalty, well, those days are over. People are more willing to switch brands than ever before.
So how do you stay ahead of the curve? How do you anticipate what your customers will want before they even know they want it?
It all starts with listening, really listening. You need to be constantly gathering feedback from your customers. Pay attention to their reviews, what they're saying on social media, do surveys, talk to them directly. Get out there and understand their needs and expectations.
So it's not just about collecting data, it's about actively seeking feedback and using it to inform every aspect of your business.
You got it. And it's not enough to just listen passively. You need to act on that feedback. Be willing to adjust course, make changes to your products or services, even pivot your entire business model if that's what it takes to stay aligned with your customers.
So you're always iterating, always evolving based on what you're hearing from your customers.
Exactly. And that's where agility comes in again. Being able to respond quickly to changes in customer preferences, that's a huge advantage in today's market.
Okay, so we've talked about listening to your customers and being responsive to their feedback, but what about personalization? How does that fit into this whole picture?
That's a great question. Personalization is everywhere these days, and it seems like it's only going to become more important as technology advances.
You're right. Personalization is key to creating those amazing customer experiences that build loyalty and engagement. And with the data and technology we have today, companies can really tailor their offerings to individual customer needs and preferences. It's like they can read your mind and give you exactly what you want before you even know you want it. But isn't there a risk of getting a little too personal? You know, that creepy feeling when you realize a company knows way too much about you.
That's a valid concern. There's definitely a fine line between personalization and feeling like your privacy is being invaded. Transparency is key. Companies need to be upfront about what data they're collecting and how they're using it, and give customers control over their own data.
So it's about finding that sweet spot between creating a personalized experience and respecting people's privacy.
Absolutely. Okay, now let's talk about talent, because even the most agile, customer-centric company in the world won't succeed without the right people in place.
So true. We touched on this earlier, but let's dive deeper. How do you attract, develop, and retain top talent in a world where the skills you need today might be obsolete tomorrow?
That's the million-dollar question, right? The old playbook for talent management, it just doesn't cut it anymore. We need a new approach, one that's built for speed and adaptability.
So instead of just looking for people who have the right skills today, you're looking for people who have the potential to learn and adapt to whatever comes next, really.
Exactly. We need to shift our focus from hiring for specific skills to hiring for adaptability, for a growth mindset, for people who are eager to learn new things and embrace new challenges.
So you're looking for people who are curious, who are comfortable with ambiguity, who are basically lifelong learners.
Exactly. And once you've found those people, you have to create the kind of environment where they can thrive.
What does that look like?
It means offering opportunities for continuous learning and development. Encourage experimentation, risk-taking. Give people the freedom and autonomy to explore new ideas and do their best work.
So it's about creating a culture where people feel empowered to learn, grow, and contribute their unique talents without being held back by rigid structures or a fear of failure.
You nailed it. Now, there's one last piece of the talent puzzle that's particularly important in this world of transient competitive advantage. And it might be a little controversial.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Lay it on me.
You need to be able to disengage talent gracefully when those skills are no longer needed. Just like companies need to let go of products and markets that have run their course, they need to be able to do the same with talent.
That sounds a bit harsh, doesn't it? Like you're just discarding people when they're no longer useful.
It can feel that way, I know, but it's a reality of this new business landscape. And it's not necessarily a bad thing. In fact, it can be an opportunity for both the company and the individual.
Okay, I'm listening. Tell me more. How can letting go of talent actually be a good thing?
Well, for the company, it allows them to stay lean and agile, constantly evolving their workforce to meet the demands of the market. They can free up resources to bring in new people with the skills they need to compete in the future. And for the individual, it can be a chance to explore new opportunities, maybe gain new experiences, maybe even find a role that's a better fit for their evolving skills and interests. It can be a chance to reinvent themselves and discover new possibilities.
So it's about recognizing that change is inevitable and creating a culture where both the company and its employees are prepared to adapt and evolve, even if that means parting ways at some point. It's about focusing on growth and opportunity for everyone involved.
Exactly. Now let's talk about something that's becoming increasingly important in this hyper-connected world, forgetting industry limits.
Okay, now you've really got my attention. What do you mean by forgetting industry limits?
For too long, we've been stuck in these rigid categories defining companies by the industry they operate in. But those lines are blurring fast. The most exciting opportunities often lie at the intersection of different industries.
So are you saying that a car company isn't just a car company anymore? Give me an example.
Think about Tesla. They're not just an automaker, right? They're a tech company, an energy company, a software company. They're involved in everything from electric vehicles and self-driving software to solar panels and battery storage.
Wow, they're playing on a whole different field. They're competing on multiple fronts, not just within that traditional automotive industry.
Exactly. And that's the kind of thinking that's going to define the most successful businesses in the future. It's about seeing beyond those old industry boundaries and recognizing opportunities that others might miss.
So it's about being open to new possibilities, challenging traditional ways of thinking, and being willing to explore uncharted territory.
Absolutely. And this approach can lead to some seriously innovative and disruptive business models.
Okay, I'm hooked. Give me some examples. How are companies actually blurring those industry lines in practice?
Think about Amazon. I mean, they started as an online bookstore, right? But they didn't let that limit them. Today, they're a retail giant, a cloud computing powerhouse, a streaming entertainment provider, a leader in AI. They've got their fingers in so many pies.
They've built an empire. It's like they've created their own universe where all these different businesses feed off each other and make them unstoppable.
Exactly. That's the power of thinking beyond those traditional industry boundaries. You create ecosystems of interconnected offerings that work together. It's a powerful model.
It's like they're playing 3D chess while everyone else is stuck playing checkers.
And it's not just Amazon. Look at companies like Google, Apple. They're also building these sprawling ecosystems that extend way beyond their original core businesses.
It seems like the old rules of competition don't even apply anymore. It's not just about beating your rivals, it's about creating something so big and so interconnected that it's almost impossible to replicate.
And a key part of that is forging strategic partnerships, often with companies that you might have considered competitors in the past.
So instead of trying to do everything yourself, you're collaborating with others to create something bigger than the sum of its parts.
Exactly. Think about Apple partnering with Goldman Sachs to create the Apple Card. They brought their expertise in technology and finance together, and they created a seamless, integrated experience for their customers.
Okay, I see how this all fits together, but it still seems like a pretty daunting task. How do you even begin to shift your mindset from competing in a single industry to building an entire ecosystem? It's a huge change.
It starts with being curious. Look beyond the boundaries of your current market. What's happening in adjacent industries? Could your existing capabilities create value in new and unexpected ways? Don't be afraid to explore.
So basically, don't be afraid to think outside the box and try new things, even if they seem a little crazy at first.
Exactly. The companies that are going to win in this new world, they're the ones who are willing to challenge the status quo, embrace change, constantly reinvent themselves.
It's inspiring, but it's also a little intimidating, right?
Yeah.
I mean, there's so much to think about, so much to do. Where do you even begin?
Well, that's something we can explore further in the final part of our deep dive. We'll get tactical, talk about specific steps companies can take to put all of these ideas into action.
Sounds good. Looking forward to it. This has been an incredibly insightful conversation so far.
Me too. It's been great.
All right, we've talked about the big ideas, the big picture of transient competitive advantage. But now, let's get down to the nitty-gritty. How can companies actually put all of these concepts into action? What are the practical steps they can take?
Great question. It all starts with a shift in mindset, really. Companies need to be more experimental, more iterative in their approach to business. Less about planning everything out perfectly in advance and more about testing, adapting, and learning as you go.
So less like, building a skyscraper with detailed blueprints and more like building a prototype, testing it out, getting feedback, making improvements.
Exactly. Think of it like, launching a new product. You wouldn't expect the first version to be perfect, right? You'd test it, get feedback from early users, and then make improvements based on that feedback. The same principle applies to your overall business strategy.
Okay, so how do you apply that kind of prototyping mindset to something as complex as a business strategy?
One powerful tool is the idea of a minimum viable product, or MVP. You've probably heard that term before, especially in the startup world.
Yeah, I have. But how does that concept apply to bigger companies, to established businesses?
It's the same idea. Instead of trying to create this perfect, polished product or service right out of the gate, You start with a stripped-down version, something with just enough features to attract those early adopters and get valuable feedback.
So you're basically dipping your toes in the water, testing the market with a smaller, less risky investment before going all in.
Exactly. It's about validating your assumptions, identifying any potential problems early on, and making adjustments before you commit a ton of resources.
That makes a lot of sense. It's about mitigating risk and maximizing learning in those early stages.
Hmm.
But once you've proven your concept with an MVP, then how do you scale up effectively? That seems like the next big challenge.
Scaling up in this environment, it's a whole different ballgame than it used to be. You need to be able to move quickly, but you also need to make sure you're maintaining quality and consistency as you grow.
So it's about finding that balance between speed and control.
Absolutely. One effective strategy is to break down your growth into stages. Set clear milestones for each stage and really focus on achieving those milestones before moving on to the next level.
So instead of trying to do everything at once, you're taking a more measured approach,
Yeah.
focusing on incremental growth and expansion.
Exactly. And at each stage, you assess your progress, gather feedback, make any necessary adjustments to your strategy. It's a constant process of learning and refining.
It sounds like it's all about continuous improvement, always looking for ways to get better.
You got it. And this iterative approach, it's not just for product development, by the way. It should be applied across the entire business to marketing, sales, operations, customer service, everywhere.
So it's about building a culture of continuous improvement, always looking for ways to optimize and refine every aspect of your business.
Exactly. Okay, now let's shift gears a bit and talk about resource allocation.
Okay, resource allocation. We talked about that a bit in the context of exit strategies, but I'm curious to hear more about how it applies to this whole idea of managing transient competitive advantage.
Yeah, well, traditional resource allocation models, they're often too rigid, too focused on the past. They tend to reward those past successes, which makes it difficult to shift resources to new opportunities when they emerge.
So you're saying companies get stuck pouring money into projects or departments that aren't really delivering the best returns anymore simply because they've been successful in the past.
That's exactly what happens. And in a world of transient competitive advantage resources, they need to be as agile and adaptable as the companies themselves.
So how do you create a more dynamic, more responsive system for allocating resources?
One key is to ditch those rigid annual budgeting cycles and adopt a more rolling forecast approach.
So instead of setting a budget in stone for a whole year, you're constantly reevaluating your priorities and adjusting your spending based on the latest information and opportunities.
Exactly. It allows you to be much more nimble, much more responsive to the market. And another important piece is transparency. Create a culture where everyone understands how resources are being allocated and why those decisions are being made.
So no more of those backroom deals or pet projects getting funded just because they're somebody's favorite. It's about making sure the resources are going where they can have the biggest impact.
Exactly. And don't be afraid to experiment with new models for resource allocation. Some companies are using internal marketplaces where different teams can bid on resources based on their strategic priorities. Others are using data and algorithms to make resource allocation decisions more efficient. It's an exciting area with a lot of potential.
It sounds like companies are really starting to think outside the box when it comes to managing their resources.
They have to. It's all about adaptability and speed in this new business landscape.
It's been an incredible journey, exploring all these ideas with you, from embracing agility and building those innovation pipelines to navigating exit strategies, becoming truly customer-centric, reimagining talent management, and even forgetting those old industry boundaries. It's clear that we're in the midst of a massive transformation in the business world.
We are. It's an exciting time to be in business, that's for sure. The companies that will thrive in this new era will be those that can embrace change, challenge the status quo, and constantly push themselves to evolve and innovate.
It's all about riding those waves of change, isn't it?
It is. And if I could leave you with one piece of advice, it would be this. Don't be afraid to experiment. Be willing to challenge your assumptions. Be open to new ideas. And most importantly, be relentless in your pursuit of excellence. The world is changing faster than ever before, and the only way to stay ahead is to embrace that change and make it work for you.
Fantastic advice. Thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us today. This has been a truly enlightening conversation.
It's been my pleasure. I've really enjoyed our conversation.